With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom. With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
Did you know they plan to build over 3,000 wind turbines on Queensland's Great Dividing Range? Over 3,700 kilometres of new haulage roads will carve through old growth forest. Destroying forests for industrial renewables makes no sense. It doesn't have to be this way. The intact biodiverse ranges of Queensland are no place for renewables. Take 2 minutes to learn the truth about the destruction they cause. Go to rainforestreserves.org.au.
For The World Today, this is James O'Neill. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen said Denmark cannot rule out a military response in Greenland after U.S. President Donald Trump refused to exclude the use of force to annex the Arctic island. Speaking amid what Danish media call the battle for Greenland, Frederiksen said Copenhagen must take Washington's statement seriously. Her office later clarified she was addressing potential scenarios rather than signaling imminent action. Denmark has substantially increased its military presence on Greenland, deploying about 100 troops, while small contingents from several European allies have rotated through for planned exercises. A 1952 royal decree obliges Danish forces to resist any attack without waiting for orders. Denmark faces possible U.S. tariffs amid the dispute. President Trump told the World Economic Forum that Europe must abandon policies he said have weakened its economies, societies, and military strength if the West is to remain unified. Trump criticized Europe's recent approaches to energy, immigration, trade, and defense, arguing they have reduced growth, lowered birth rates, and left nations vulnerable to adversaries. He said the United States wants strong allies rather than weakened ones, and framed Greenland as a clear national security example. Trump reiterated that only the U.S. can adequately defend Greenland, but said he does not intend to seize the island by force, stressing that he does not want to use military power to acquire it. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte credited President Trump with compelling European allies to significantly increase defense spending and reduce reliance on U.S. taxpayers. Speaking at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Rutte said Trump's pressure created the framework for Europe's military survival. Trump and U.S. officials have urged NATO members to raise defense spending to 5% of GDP, far above the alliance's long-standing 2% target. Secretary of State Marco Rubio emphasized that the increase would occur over time but must follow a credible path. Only a minority of NATO members met the 2% benchmark in 2022, but Trump later hailed agreement on higher spending as a historic achievement. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney said the so-called rules-based international order was knowingly upheld, despite being partly untrue, because it benefited Western countries. Speaking at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Carney said powerful nations routinely exempted themselves from rules, applied trade laws unevenly, and enforced international law selectively. He argued that this arrangement has collapsed amid intensifying great power rivalry, where trade, finance, and infrastructure are increasingly used as coercive tools. His remarks echoed criticism from Russia that global rules have been abandoned.
On Arctic sovereignty, we stand firmly with Greenland and Denmark and fully support their unique right to determine Greenland's future.
Nigel Farage's Reform UK party is launching a legal challenge against Labour-led councils seeking to postpone local elections scheduled for May, arguing the move undermines democracy. 28 councils, mostly Labour-controlled, have applied to delay votes, citing ongoing governance restructurings. Reform UK says the delays are politically motivated, noting polling suggests it could win control of multiple councils. A High Court judge has approved a full hearing in February. Reform leaders and MPs warned that postponing elections for millions of voters would be unprecedented. The dispute adds pressure on Prime Minister Keir Starmer ahead of local elections seen as a key political test. Reform UK leader Nigel Farage explained why he's going to Davos.
You guys, the globalists, have had it your way for far too long. British governments have been craven to you, rather pandering to you than standing up for the interests of British people and British workers. And I'm going to tell them, all of that is going to change. There is going to be a new government in Britain that puts British priorities first. So ask yourself a question. Would you rather I stayed at home or rather I went and gave that honest message?
This has been James O'Neill for The World Today.
Just tell me if it's in focus or... Is this okay?
This experience has really opened my eyes. When I went to work that morning, I never would have thought that I would end up in a homeless shelter and all of this because of it. You know, the blink of an eye and your life has changed forever. Yeah, when you come in here for the first time, it really is horrible and daunting. You suddenly think, you know, is this what my life has become? There's no soul, there's absolutely nothing here. And imagine coming in here and you've got a child to bring in as well. Imagine trying to make it a home for them, because they've got to share it as well. And this is an imprint for their future. So you can see what this place is like. We wander across in my room. As you can see, there's very little space. His bed to make him comfortable, pictures on the walls. That's my own cupboard I have to bring in. Well, it's Friday night. It's almost 11 o'clock. There's been a major row or something like that occurring in the other end of the block. I've got nowhere to go to, so I'm here with my son. This weekend there was a little bit of aggravation, okay, a lot of shouting and things like that, right? How did that make you feel?
Bit annoyed.
Why did it make you annoyed?
Because of shouting, bad words and stuff.
I really need to get out of this place.
With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
And welcome to a Thursday. It's the Protagonists. Nice to have your company. Lots and lots of things happening in Australia. We used to have an opposition. Well, not for a long time, but we used to have a coalition of the willing. No, not so much anymore. We may even delve into that and see what the hell's happened. And government is always a better government if you have a better opposition. Maybe that's a thing of the past. Maybe fish and chips is the order of the day. And hello to Pauline Hanson. The highly controversial anti-Semitism, hate and extremism laws were passed by Parliament this week without due and proper process. Now, while a small section of the community has welcomed them as a step in the right direction, most commentators are rightly concerned about their likely prohibition of legitimate mainstream options and target groups a future government may not like. It is far from clear that the safeguards provided are adequate and free from politicisation, or if they could prevent, well, another Bondi attack. A panicked and mainly incompetent government, aided and abetted by a spineless leader of the opposition, won the day, and the rights and freedoms of ordinary Australians have again been hit. Time will tell whether Albanese Prime Minister Albanese has caused a major fissure in the ALP, given the concerns about genocide inflicted by Israel in Gaza. Will I be arrested for saying bad things, truthful things? Along with ordinary Australians, the opposition, which again shown itself incapable of defending the very principles it espouses, is a big loser. Let's talk to our panel today on the new laws, what their main concerns are, and perhaps what should have happened. Our panel today consists of Tony Nikolic, lawyer and human rights advocate, the Honourable Margaret Reynolds, AC, and she was a senator for Queensland from 1983 to 1999. And Kim Wangarai, I got that wrong, Wingarai, sorry, is the publisher and writer for Michael West Media. Thank you for joining me. Tony, as a lawyer, do you think you'll be busy? Because, I mean, this is just a rush through bill that has already been attacked from within Parliament. Where do you see it heading? What's the lay of the land?
Well, quite simply, it's a case here where the rule of law is actually being threatened quite significantly. I don't think there's ever been a challenge to the rule of law here in Australia such as this. Well, there was one in 1951 with where the High Court struck down the Australian Communist Party case, and that was one that was a quite significant but decisive action whereby they were striking down Parliament's ability to introduce powers to make laws with respect to, say, a lighthouse, and then they can label anything a lighthouse. This is how indecisive these laws are, because they're very vague and opaque. And then they're going to go ahead and they're going to punish anything and everything that they determine is a lighthouse. Now, when you actually look at how they're doing this, well, it's very clear in the bill that they've put forward where the Minister for Home Affairs can interpret a situation or a group and then simply make a phone call and say, I don't like these people, I want to ban them. Well, I'm sorry, that's not how this country works. And unless people, rise up and start saying, hang on a second, our constitution, if we're going to do anything as patriots of this country, doesn't matter whether you're a lawyer, doesn't matter whether you're a doctor, a plumber, you're a stay-at-home mum, this is going to affect each and every one of us so profoundly that at any given time, the Minister for Home Affairs or another minister, and who are they going to call? Do they call the police? Do they call the courts? Who are they calling? Because that's not distinguished here. That's absolutely not even in this. So, if we go back to that horror movie, The Silence of the Lambs, you know what I mean? The most disturbing part about this isn't going to be the screams and the haunts. It's going to be the silence upon which is imposed upon the Australian people and only left to the executive.
Margaret, how do you see the lay of the land at the moment? Tony asks, who will you call? First thing that came to my mind was Ghostbusters. And they would probably have more of an effect, wouldn't they, than what we have at the moment?
Well, look, Mike, I'm in a very unhappy position because I'm a long-time Labor Party member. I'm still a Labor Party member, and I just despair at the way in which the current government is not continuing the legacy of Labor in this country for over 100 years. We've found so many challenges in recent years, especially in relation to international law, and Tony has talked about the importance of how the law is operating in Australia, the rule of law. I couldn't believe when I heard on the news recently that the Prime Minister had invited President Herzog to visit Australia after the Bondi attack. And I thought it was the opposition. And it was, my partner had to tell me, no, it's the government that's actually asked him. Our government seems to have lost its way in terms of international law, in terms of independent foreign policy. mind you, I understand with Trump in power, it's a challenge for Australia. But if the public doesn't, as Tony says, rise up and act uh, and speak out against what has just happened, it's going to be very, very bad for Australia's reputation as a country that normally supports international law, initiates conflict resolution around the world, is involved in peacekeeping. But that's not how we're behaving at the moment.
Kim, how do you see it? I mean, it's Tony suggested Ghostbusters. We have Margaret mentioned that the international stage is quite all over the shop and mainly attributed to. Can't just blame Donald Trump, but he is in there with a big wooden spoon. And then we have this fiasco, and that's what it is. And it has changed the face, in my opinion, of Australia. How do you feel?
Well, it is very bad legislation. There's no doubt about that. But the fact is, it is all about the politics. It's so much about the politics that at this stage, it's unclear. Like Tony said, it's unclear how this law is actually going to work. And as far as I'm concerned, there's no doubt that it will be challenged on constitutional grounds. But even that would be a difficult argument to make because we have a dysfunctional constitution to address these things. But it's all about the politics, and that's the scary part. And it's even hard to understand how the Nationals, sorry, not the Nationals, how the Nationals walked away today. I have yet to understand on what grounds they actually did that. But Mike, you were saying, Albanese is a bad politician. I actually disagree. He's a very, very clever politician. That doesn't necessarily mean that he's a great leader for this country. And I'm certainly very disappointed in a lot of the things that he has done, or more importantly, what he hasn't done, and his government hasn't done. But he's a very, very clever politician. A week ago, he was weakened substantially by his delay, which I personally think was probably a smart delay, of setting up a Royal Commission. And his poll numbers were down, and everyone was saying, oh, this is the big moment backwards for Albanese. Now we're a week hence, and he's rammed this legislation through, and in the process, weaken the opposition even further, if that was even possible. So it's clever politics, but it's really bad for the country.
And I don't think many of us are saying that he's not. When we say, oh, what a stupid thing he's done, but we're not saying that he's a stupid politician. He is very clever, and so are foxes. They're very slippery too and clever. Tony Nicola, tell me first of all your views on how our Prime Minister has performed, how the opposition has performed, and the bill itself. If we criticise, for example, the genocide perpetrated on the Palestinians, if we criticise them for that, do we go to jail and don't pass go?
Well, Mike, in my younger days, and going back
that's a long time ago.
Yeah, no, I'm actually 21. I was just, law's a stressful job. But I was actually in the Labor Lawyers, and I used to write publications for Legal Tweaks and things like that. I've moved on from there. Very good friends. I don't know if the late Bruce Childs, he was like a mentor to me. And I respect him. I was at his funeral. Tanya Plebiscite was there. Mr. Albanese was there. And look, I've got the utmost respect. I believe these people go into these positions to make a change and to make a difference. That's my deep held belief. But when they get there, what happens and what are the machinery and the substance behind that and what's changing those? And I'll divert slightly off the ALP. I don't think they're representing the people. I will say that. Again, I don't make it a personal thing. I make it a political idea where I don't necessarily agree. But that also brings us to the very heart of what the hate speech laws and combating anti-Semitism is all about, free speech. And the denial of that free speech moving forward is a significant concern to me. And when we look at how these politicians have been performing, say during COVID, and everyone knows what I did during COVID. What we were seeing was a lot of spin and not a lot of action. Shane Warne, the late Shane Warne, and a respected cricketer, he would have been very proud of some of the flippers that they were flying. But in this sense, what we're seeing here, look at Andrew Hastie, for instance, the other day, all the way up until 24 hours before the bill was going to be put before Parliament. He's saying he's going to oppose it. It comes out and he says, well, I'm going to support it. And no one knows what they're supporting. No one knows what elements of the bill they're rejecting. And we don't know that. And one of the most significant aspects, and I think a lot of people are going past this very, very important point. Kim touched on it a moment ago where it was being rammed through. Well, it's being rammed through pursuant to Standing Order 142, which is a guillotine order. Those guillotine orders are typically reserved for emergencies. Let me tell you something. No one's launching cruise missiles at Australia from offshore. There isn't mass shootings in schools and as a consequence. And let me just say this. We are all deeply saddened and bruised as a nation with what happened. It is absolutely one of the most deplorable things. But using emergency powers in circumstances where there isn't an emergency, that has nothing to do with anything other than, and this is where I disagree wholeheartedly with the entire Parliament, except for those who resisted it, to the extent that they've accepted the very provision of a guillotine order to allow this to go through. Well, what does that do? It prevents the debate, doesn't it? How do we, as citizens, honestly look up to these representatives and say, you're representing my view when they don't have a voice? Look, it gives you a vote, but it does not let you debate the very essence upon which will change the very fabric of this country moving forward. They've mentioned a lot of groups. Within those groups or out of those groups, Christians aren't even mentioned. So the division and the social cohesion that we're seeing Albanese preach isn't coming out in any of this stuff, and we're not seeing any of the politicians come out and say, well, I'm for it on this basis and I'm for it on that basis. Now, there are some very critical points of that bill that are very good. I'm against the firearms part of it. I think they've absolutely kiboshed the firearms. They're blaming people. I'm a firearms owner. I'm endorsed. I do all the right things, and so do 99%. And I've represented people who have imported firearms illegally into this country. It's not the legal firearms people and the criminals who are doing this. Okay, we're persecuting the wrong people. It's just an issue here where we have exploitation, and they're exploiting what happened.
I just want to read a couple of posts on X, which is despised by the federal government, which must mean it's doing something right. Mary Kostakidis says Australia should withdraw the invitation to Herzog, or the government's noises about social cohesion and adherence to international law are meaningless. Cheryl Curnow, keep those bastards honest. I have created an e-petition to Parliament calling on the government to rescind the invitation to Herzog to visit Australia in February or ever. I've argued that the UN Commission of Inquiry determined Herzog is inciting the Commission of Genocide and that his visit will promote. Margaret, tell me, is that now regarded as hate speech?
Well, I think there's a lot of double standards in the politicisation of this entire issue. Instead of focusing on the absolute tragedy of those 15 people killed just at random at Bondi, the whole debate has become political about anti-Semitism and what should or should not be done to prevent a future action. And I think that what we have to remember is that there will be a Royal Commission, and it would have been better to wait for the Royal Commission, which has got a short time frame, And it's up to the Royal Commission to say what Australia needs to do to prevent it. It's not up to the government to rush through legislation which may or may not assist, and in fact, it may in fact disrupt a further social cohesion.
Yeah, I agree with you. Kim, the same thing. You heard that post from Mary and Cheryl, and they were criticising Herzog and also criticising Israel. For me, for reading that out, and for Mary and Cheryl for writing that, and for you for talking about it, do we stand the chance of being arrested for hate speech?
I don't think so, based on this new legislation, but it's hard to say. But when you bring up Mary Kostakidis, what she is going through, and I've followed the case, and I've been to court cases. I talk to Mary regularly, and here is an upstanding journalist of terrific reputation over many years, and just because someone didn't like what she said, they can sue her. And that's not this legislation, that's 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act, but it's the same thing. Basically, because someone feels like they've been hurt, they can sue you. And yes, someone can listen to this and they feel like they've been hurt, and they can sue us. I mean, that is just absolutely wrong in a free society. And it impacts tremendously on people like Mary, who for the last 12 months feels this pressure at a very personal level. And for her to continue to stand up and to continue to speak out, if I had a hat, I'd take it off. It's amazing. I mean, we need more people like that. And those people need to be able to do that without threat of being sued or threat of jail, if we look at this new hate speech legislation.
Tony, can you, being a lawyer, one of the greatest in the world, you keep telling me, can you tell me if those two posts, can it be regarded as anti-Semitism?
Yes, you and I think Kim and Margaret have pretty well touched and yourself have touched on this quite graphically, in the sense that the essence of the bill is no longer as we would have done in law, where conduct led to harm. It is perceptions have led to feelings being hurt. That is an extraordinarily dangerous place to go. And I want to refer to what Josh Hawley in the US Senate did quite recently with a certain doctor I won't name, but it's very public. And he said, "Can men get pregnant?" And she danced around everything like that. Now, let's take that example. Can men get pregnant? There was no emphatic no from that doctor. She just danced around it. But if we were to say that when this bill comes out, there is a very high likelihood that you're going to find yourself in either a state supreme or a federal court. Now, that's not fanciful, because we've all seen that there are cases right now where a lady in the said that men can't breastfeed is being taken to court, and that's here in Australia. Now, the very important point about this, it takes us back to what legal fiction is. And what is legal fiction? I think we really need to bring Australia back to the realm of what is real, and legal authority depends on realities, not political constructs, not labels, and not declarations. I can sit there and call a hippopotamus a giraffe, but is it really a giraffe? It's not. It's a hippopotamus. Why would I go running this fanciful, and I'm hoping that giraffes and hippopotamuses at Taronga Zoo aren't going to lay a charge on me with this, but I'm just thinking here, are we going to get into this phrase where, these legal it's sci-fi. It's so crazy that Australia is actually looking at these sorts of things, and we really need to hunker back down to our constitution and say, what is the legal reality? What is the reality? If it's not real, what the hell are we talking about? If it's an imaginary consequence, it's an imaginary consequence. Let's not impose that upon the population.
Just on the giraffe, I think you've been sticking your neck out a bit on that one. Now, also the laws, are these, sorry, I'm very quick tonight. These laws, Tony, and I'll ask everybody of this question, are these laws likely to reduce anti-Semitism or the risk of another attack on Bondi? And just part two of that one, which Australians do you think will be most affected by this?
All Australians are going to be affected by it. The very fact that they've singled out, one group, to me is irrelevant, because remember, the law needs to be applied equally across everybody. Whether they apply it equally against everyone or with everyone remains to be seen. Let's hope that this thing never sees the light of day. That's what I would like to say, because that's what my submission said. It should never have been introduced. We had adequate laws on the books. We had laws for incitement, criminal events. We had all that's there. We didn't need this, okay? Now, there may have been some tweaks to the Migration Act that I actually think appear to be quite sensible in some areas, obviously, but I think they've exploited this this issue, this tragedy of what happened on Bondi to push all these other things. Now, here's a very controversial thing. I just came back from Texas only some months ago, and one of the issues, fittingly, and I've been writing about this previously in the media and things like that, is gun laws. And that was before Bondi. One thing that struck me in Texas, and it's very controversial from an Australian cultural point of view, and it is an extremely controversial point that I'm about to raise. And many people may think, I'm crazy, but I'm not. If there were more people out there with a commissioner's decree or permit that had concealed carry licenses, that shooting at Bondi would have ended in 1 minute. It would have ended in 1 minute. Now, I'm not condoning Cowboy Town. Let's not exaggerate the point, because people in Texas, and they don't do that. It's not a cowboy town where you put your hat on a bar and have a shot of whiskey and everyone's shooting at it. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we're one of the most heavily regulated countries on earth when it comes to firearms, and they want to regulate it again. If there were concealed carry people out there, that death toll would have been significantly less. Instead, we had Jewish people throwing rocks at people, shooting with guns. We had unarmed people charging people with guns. That's what happens when you disarm a lawful society. That's exactly what happens. There can be no better evidence and proof of what has happened there, that the mitigation and irresponsible administration of the laws in this country has actually contributed potentially to what happened.
And just on those gun laws, if you look at, for example, in Victoria with those machete bins, and that got the chop very quickly, but these machete bins were, they're still attacking people in the streets and in their homes with machetes. So that didn't work. And the same thing with guns. I haven't yet seen any gang member or criminal or bank robber hand in their guns yet, because they need that. That's one of their.
Mike, can I just sorry to interrupt you there, but and I apologise, but let me tell you how out of touch this is. During a press conference soon after the Bondi, and I call it the Bondi massacre tragedy, okay, because it was, and my heart goes out to each and every one of those people, because they did not deserve it, and Australia didn't deserve it, but Premier Chris Minns came out and said we need to ban belt-fed shotguns. No such gun exists. These are the people who want to pass laws. No such gun exists. What are we banning? We're banning, here it is again. We've got these legal constructs of where people just want to, and Margaret said it, we've politicised something, and we're running on the back of something, and that is, tragedies, and we're exploiting things. We actually need people who know what's happening. We need people of great background. We need stakeholders. We need the gun industry involved. By wiping out this, I'm going to tell you, how many people are going to be unemployed here? there's going to be a lot of people who are going to become unemployed. They're going to be on Centrelink. Who's going to pick up the wage? Oh, let me see. I'll tell you who, the taxpayer. Me and you. Our taxes are going to go up again. Then they're going to bring in the gun buyback scheme, and our taxes are going to go up again. This is a ridiculous attempt to blame and scapegoat people. I've represented people who have imported 250 guns at a time, okay? But I've never represented a lawful gun owner for doing that. Never.
Just a post from regarding Chris Minns, and he says here that you will get the freedom of speech opportunities that the government affords you, not what you think you're entitled to. Margaret, I mean, which I've got to be very careful here because I'll go to jail. Which prison camp did Chris Minns work in? I used to be a Labor supporter. I don't support many at the moment, anybody. And if that was said in my day, which was, we didn't have horses in those days, but in my day, when I grew up with Paul Keating and all that, and he would have gone nuts, wouldn't he, Margaret?
He would have, yes. Look, I think the problem is that our leaders, whichever party they come from, but I can talk about Labor leaders, they don't know how to deal with the crisis. And this really all started for the Albanese government when an ally, Israel, starts to respond as it has in Gaza and is, of course, accused of genocide. And the International Court of Justice has actually ruled that much of its government's behaviour is indeed outside of international law. And the problem is that neither Albanese and his government nor Chris Minns can deal with crises. Instead of saying of Bondi, this is an absolute tragedy, what will we do to prevent it? And go away and seriously consider what can be done to prevent it. They overreact. They do silly things in terms of some of the language that is used, and they come forward with this type of legislation, which is just going to further affect social cohesion. I mean, earlier, Tony, you were talking about animals, and the elephant in the room has always been that the Labor administration cannot talk about genocide, even though genocide and Australia's responsibility to act is in our national law, was introduced in our national law, and Tony, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in 2002. We never hear from any of our Labor leaders about why so many Australians are out there demonstrating, about why it is an issue for Australia to be talking about genocide, because our government won't. And instead, they talk about anti-Semitism. And, anti-Semitism, until recently, and yes, I accept that it was a direct attack on the Jewish community at Bondi, but I think we have to ask ourselves, why won't our government actually challenge the Netanyahu regime, let alone invite the current president, Herzog? And then they try to talk to us about they're all for social cohesion. They haven't even got social cohesion within the Labor Party, because so many Labor Party people like me, and you mentioned the wonderful Bruce Childs, Tony, we are just devastated that a Labor administration can behave in the way it's behaving.
I just want to ask you, Margaret, we've talked about, and it's been very public, what's happening within the opposition. And it's Pauline Hanson must be rubbing her hands together at the moment. What do you think's happening within the ALP at the moment?
Well, the Labor Party, I always say, is good in domestic politics. I mean, there have been some good reforms over during the Albanese government. They haven't done enough about equality and the distribution of wealth, but there have been some good, strong reforms. But I'm afraid they're just lacking. Even Penny Wong, who we had such high hopes for her as foreign minister, but she has not been allowed to set the agenda she started out with as an opposition spokesperson in foreign affairs. And so we've just been dominated by Richard Marles, the Defence Department, AUKUS, etc., etc. And then you have the tragedy of Gaza, and our former Attorney General was in a very difficult position, and I understand that, because as a practicing Jewish person, it must have been a terrible conflict for him. But now we have another Attorney General, Michelle Rowland, who won't even utter the word genocide, even though, as the first law officer of the country, she is obliged under that legislation. And I'd have to get Tony to help me with that. But, it's just, it's smoke and mirrors in so many areas where we have double standards in how we respond to certain tragedies, and we don't respond to a tragedy that is our responsibility, that is genocide.
Kim, do you think the powerful Jewish lobby or Israel forced Albanese's hand? And he was already under pressure from from those with his views on the Palestinian state. And Margaret is right. I mean, and again, if we talk about the genocide that was committed by Israel, and there are a lot of stories associated with that, which people aren't talking about. If we did that, I would stand the chance of having a hello, and on the door. And I'm just thinking though that perhaps it's gotten out of control with Albanese because he's been pressurised by it's a very powerful lobby. And Israel, look at the reach of Netanyahu. It's enormous from Washington to Canberra. What do you think?
That is the real issue behind all of this, is the pressure that's brought upon the government in so many different ways by the Israel lobby. It is incredibly powerful, and it's overtly powerful, but it is also powerful, immensely powerful behind the scenes. And words matter, and this discussion about genocide or not, well, why don't we just call it industrial scale mass murder, because that's what it is. But that by saying that also kind of makes a mockery out of this attempt to stop words. Words must always be seen in context. And I was reminded the other day of that old gag. I think it's from a cricket field where the coach comes running back into the dressing room and says, "Now, which one of you bastards called that black bastard a bastard?" Now, in context, only black bastard is actually racist, but the other bastards are not, because that's how we speak in Australia. But it's just a good example just to look at how ridiculous this whole debate is about how we are not allowed to criticize, and then from there to not being allowed to criticize, we now shall not use certain words. And it's completely against all the principles that I've been brought up with freedom of speech.
I think Kim, you're right. And Mark, I think the issue is, there's a really good point there you made there, which with respect to Australians were pretty well, en masse. We were brought up to be tolerant, respectful. Like I grew up, and I think I've said it before. I was more afraid of my mum and not getting home when the lights come on, before the lights came on, than anything else in this world. I remember if the lights came home and I was riding my bike, I'd start crying because I knew I'd crossed the line. But more to the point, and Margaret, to your point, I believe it's Section 268 of the Criminal Code that ties on to the genocide, the UN Genocide Convention of 1948, and that also ties into the Rome Statute for genocide. So the criminal courts. So I think that's what we're getting at there. But can I just add one element to what we're talking about here? And this is where I'm passionate. I understand, and I've done a thesis on ethnic violence and all this. I understand that. And I'm really aware of what's happening, and I'm cognizant, and there's such tragedy and sadness in this world. We're seeing on one side the social construct, obviously, of the pain and despair of so much death in the Middle East and Gaza. And we also seen what happened here. But more importantly, the big question that I always face is, we're not here in a two-state solution in Australia. I don't want it to. This is Australia. This is where I grew up, and that's what I want to defend. We are one nation, and as long as it's good to respect, understand, and know what's happened. That I agree with. That I agree with, being respectful, and that I will defend all the way. But one thing we've forgotten through all of this, we've forgotten Australia and the Australians. And I got goosebumps right now because everyone's talking about the two-state solution. Whatever happened to Australia? What happened to Australia? What happened to the Australia we grew up in? We keep diverting off to these other challenges and this group and that group and this group and that. No, you come here, you do what I had to do and my parents had to do because this is where I was born and bred. We had to assimilate. And that's what we're here. We've forgotten we're Australian, and we can't detract from that. We are Australian no matter what. We have an identity. We are sovereign. We are sovereign citizens. We're a sovereign citizen, a nation of this world, and that's exactly where it's going to stay. That's my very firm view.
Can I ask you, I'll stay with you for one moment, Tony. What does the government want to achieve, really?
I'm not in the inner workings.
What's your gut feeling as Australia, if not the world's greatest lawyer?
Control. It's absolute control. And by silencing the voice, we take away the Australia that we're talking about, right? We're taking away that Australia. How else can we move forward as a country whether I can't debate with Margaret can't debate with Kim, you can't debate with Mike about what we believe is in our best interests. It doesn't mean I'm right. It doesn't mean you're right. But that is the beauty of this country we're in. This country we live in allowed us to open up with free debate. It allowed us to say, hang on, the steam engine is no longer good for us. Let's move into the combustion. Let's pretend we had the hate speech bill at that time. Well, you've just hit every steam engine engineer and coal miner, and you've just offended so many groups. Now, it's a very stark example, but that's exactly where we're heading. This is not about what happened with respect to victims, and I think we've acknowledged that, but this is about control. This is about shutting people up. It's literally what I do on a daily basis here when we go to the courts and we represent people in restraining orders and domestic violence, and whether it's one party or other, go in the corner, shut your mouth. I'm going to control you financially. I'm going to control what you say. I'm going to control where you go, and I'm going to control what you do. Now, this is where we're headed, and you can literally see it in the Act, and the bill actually speaks about the finances, the health, and other consequences. This is exactly what they tried in the misinformation bill. It went down, and they've slipped one of these sections in there. So if you come out there and you say, I don't like the economy, we're going to go into a recession, I don't like what that group of people said, guess what? You can go into a recession, you can't say anything about it.
Margaret, you've been one of the decision makers for government. Tell me this: what does I don't know if Anthony Albanese knows. At the end of the day, what do they want to achieve? Is it they would like to shut everybody up, control speech, control thought, or is it less nefarious than that? Is it just that they've bowed to the Israeli lobby and to Netanyahu? I don't understand what he would really like out of this. I sort of agree with Tony that he wants to to have that control, because if you look at the opposition, when they were the opposition, the coalition of the, I won't go there at all, sorry, but the Shadow Minister for Communications said government has to control the internet. They want to control. What's your thoughts?
Look, any government, good and not so good, wants to exert control. They want to, that's why parliamentarians do what they do. They develop policies. They want to change opportunities for various reasons. Some good, some not so good. So yes, they do want control, and they do want power, and of course, too much power corrupts. Now, I don't personally think that the current government is corrupt. I think this is the federal government, I don't think they're corrupt. I think they're weak. I think they're timid. I think they're ill-informed about their responsibilities in international relations. And I think they're intimidated. I mean, that's the word in the legislation, that if you feel intimidated, well, I think the Albanese government feels so intimidated by outside forces, including, Netanyahu, Trump, etc., that he feels the only way he can manage it is to introduce laws that intimidate the rest of us. And I don't think in his case it's necessarily deliberate trying to suppress freedom of speech. That's not the way he entered Parliament. That's not the way he was mentored by Tom Uren. I think he is himself intimidated, and he's not prepared to take advice. Chris Sidoti, for instance, the eminent human rights lawyer and the person who worked on the UN report that found genocide was indeed being committed in Gaza. Chris could have been briefing the Albanese government. He hasn't had a call. My feeling is that the government doesn't know how to manage crises, is badly advised, and the result we've seen this week. Let's hope that the Royal Commission can set the balance a little bit more on side, so that Australians are in fact included, and the recommendations from the Royal Commission are in fact those that will restore some sort of order to freedom of speech in this country.
Kim, I disagree. I think the government does want to control. I think free speech in this country is dead. And if I just repeat again the post that was suggested or said, Chris Minns says that you will get the freedom of speech opportunities that the government affords you, not what you think you're entitled to. I
think that is a good point. I think, again, it's all about controlling the narrative right now. And I think it's important to remember that. I don't think necessarily that Albanese and his government are anti-free speech as such. I think they are incompetent in how they're dealing with it. But there is a very, very, very big elephant in this room that we have so far not mentioned, and that is mainstream media. So, for instance, for Chris Minns to be able to stand up and say that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, he would have been shot down in flames.
Yes.
Also in the mainstream media. But the mainstream media just lets that pass. It amplifies it and lets it, or just plain lets it pass. And when you look at, for instance, Netanyahu, who within 24 hours of the Bondi massacre took it upon himself to make a political, a grotesque political point out of it, the mainstream media lapped it up all the way. And why? Because just like the government is under so much pressure from the Zionist lobby, the mainstream media is even more under pressure. I come back to a story that John Lyons told in one of his books, where two leaders from the Jewish community stormed into the editor of The Age at the time, complaining about a crossword puzzle where the solution was Palestine. This is the kind of narrative control that the Zionist lobby is inserting. It is absolutely diabolical, and mainstream media lets it happen.
And we do get into legacy media, but on the other side too, it's amazing how many are paid from independent media by Israel, and that's and we may never know the full extent. We have a very good idea, but I'm not going to tell anybody because I'll go to jail. I don't want that, or something worse than that. Have to. Anyway, I won't go there at all. But just to wrap up, because I'm thinking the government and the opposition under Susan Lee, or former opposition leader, eventually. Tell me, Tony, your thoughts about the ensuing months, and I'll ask each one of the panel, if you don't mind, to give me your thoughts. But Tony, first of all, yourself, what's going to happen? What do you see where do you see the landscape? How do you think Australia is going to react to the international community to what we're going through at the moment?
Well, firstly, democracy and the democratic principles that we live under, or should be living under, they don't collapse overnight. It's not one single event. It's a successive roll of events that keep on going down the track until such time as you find out you've actually lost everything. And so any idea where they say, look, at this moment, this is all we're going to do. Well, no, that's just a big chunk that you're not going to get back, okay? You're just not going to get it back. And I want everyone to remember what happened with Martin Neelmere. I think we all know Martin Neelmere during Second World War. And I think the key issue that was reflected upon then is the catastrophe of totalitarianism, that oppression in itself did not occur and it did not arrive overnight. It advanced because people assumed that each and every aspect of their life did not concern them until such time as the question came to them. And it was at that point in time they realised that these little slides that they have allowed for whatever politicised, emotional and highly emotive, thanks to the media that Kim was referring to there. But we need to understand that those little slides are taking us further and further down a track that we're not going to get back. And so it's very important that we consider those points. In respect of an opposition, I've been saying that since COVID we didn't have an opposition. I think my submissions to Parliament, to the Senate, and my letters, my open letters and appearances on different news channels actually indicated we had no opposition. There was no, and we still don't have an opposition. It's an absolute farce to think. That's why when you have a look at what's happening with One Nation, love them or hate them, irrespective, they have held a line. They've given these promises and it's just been unwavering. And no political party has been able to match that. And that's why the Australian people who are the judges, and again, this is a marathon, not a sprint. So polls say a lot of things now, and they may say a lot of different things in 6 to 8 months or 2 years' time. But right now, it's very appealing because One Nation has made promises. They've actually walked into the Senate and the chambers and held those promises.
I just want to ask Margaret the same question, Margaret, but also, and I know that Kim has to go fairly soon. If you wouldn't mind just waiting for 2 minutes, I'll be 2 minutes late. Margaret, if you worked under Keating and Hawke, and as part two of what I would like to answer, which Tony has just answered his views, what do you think they would have done, Keating and Hawke? And I think, I mean, I did change my colours much to my father's horror, but I think there were Keating and Hawke were two of Australia's greatest prime ministers, and politics in those days was a little more Australian than it is now. But what do you think? You know, knowing them, working under them, what do you think they would have done or said to what's happening at the moment?
Look, it's a tough question because whatever I say, I can't back up because it's not their job to be involved. But I think there would have been a much stronger Australian voice in the international debate. I think certainly Paul Keating would have challenged Trump. I think Bob Hawke would have been much more vocal about the atrocities in Gaza. And you only have to look at the way Bob Hawke responded to Tiananmen Square. And I cannot see him just sitting around not daring to say a word as 78,000 people are murdered, which of course is what has happened more recently in Gaza. So I think they would have been much more vocal, much more principled, and less concerned about what the mainstream media, the Murdochs, etc., was saying. And that's what we need, and that's what Albanese is going to need to do. He has a huge majority. He's got some very talented front and indeed backbenchers. He just needs to stop and think, why is he in this job? It's not to stay there. It's to leave an important legacy that is part of the Labor tradition. And when he shakes hands with President Herzog in front of the cameras, many of us are just going to be so ashamed. Ashamed for him, ashamed for Australia.
And Kim, I know you have to go, so we'll make this fairly quick. First of all, I'd like to get your views on, because you're probably around my age, 21, but sort of like that. But what do you think Hawke and Keating would have done? I mean, and just a side note, I interviewed Bob Hawke when I was a cadet journalist at 3AW and on a Sunday afternoon, and they knew what I was to expect. I got this broadside from Bob Hawke, and never again will I call him on a Sunday. Well, I can't now, but I never again did I call him on a Sunday afternoon, on a sunny Sunday afternoon. But he was a very good Prime Minister, in my opinion. So was Paul Keating. What do you think they would have said, and where do you see the lay of the land quickly?
Well, I agree with Margaret's assessment there, and she was a lot closer to that than I was at that time. What I actually think is happening too is there is a change in the narrative beyond what we're seeing through mainstream media and what we're seeing in Canberra. Every day we get submissions and commentary and people of Jewish origins wanting to have their voices heard through our channel. And those voices are voices of reason. And they're coming more and more strongly from the Jewish diaspora too. And I think that will, in the short term, make the Zionist lobby even more intent, even more desperate. But I'm an optimist at heart, which is really hard at this point in time in history. But I actually think that the narrative is slowly changing away from supporting the mass murder that's happening, and that more people are speaking up to say, this is enough. And to say to the government, you have to step up to the plate and stand for what you say you stand for in terms of human rights. At least that's what I hope.
Kim, if somebody wants to find out more about what you do, how do they do that?
michaelwest.com.au, that's our website.
Fantastic, and what a great talent he is. Margaret, are you not a Twitter person or an X person? Are you one of those? And if you are, how do they read your writings?
Pearls and Irritations, John Menadew's online journal, wonderful articles every day of the year, and a big call out to John and his wife Susie, who's died recently, for initiating what is really free debate in the Australian media.
Fantastic. And Tony Nikolic, lawyer extraordinaire, how do they find out more about you?
Look up the dictionary term provocateur, My name will come under there. It's at Tony Nicolik 10 on Twitter, at AFL Solicitors on Instagram, Facebook, and they can contact us. Tony at aflsolicitors.com.au. And remember, everyone, hold the line. Free speech is the way to go. Whether we agree, it don't matter. What matters is we have it.
Fantastic. Tony, Margaret and Kim, thank you very much. This has been The Protagonists, and this is The World Today.